All right, my name is Towles. I'm a new hire. Just finished my PhD at Mississippi State, and I've taken the 80% research, 20% extension entomologist position at the Macon Ridge Research Station in Winsboro. And I'm going to talk a little bit about pest identification in cotton today. So probably the first thing we usually see on seedling cotton is thrips. Keep in mind that we see thrips just about on everything. They've got just as many host plants as about a plant bug does. So seeing adult thrips, don't get worked up over it. What you do need to watch out for is when they start laying eggs and nymphs start coming out on your cotton, that's when you really need to start paying attention. Now when you get these on your plants, if you're sampling in the field and you're starting to see them, you can't really, you can't tell a difference in nymphs when it comes to your species. So all these nymphs are going to look the same. But typically what we see the most often is the tobacco thrips. So if you have a plate or just beat cotton seedlings over your hands and you're starting to see the little black ones, those are typically tobacco thrips. The westerns and the eastern flower thrips, there's a few more, but these are typically the main ones we see. And if you just see yellow, you're not going to sit there and ID them to species. You just know that they're adults, flower thrips. Some of the damage we see is this crinkling in the leaves. They get in that terminal, they'll crinkle it up. Those leaves will start to turn grayish. And this is actually, in my trial, it's probably some of the worst I've seen this year in my stuff at least. That terminal, I'd be surprised if that cotton plant is even still standing. Another thing that pops up typically from emergence until the end, aphids. You can tell an aphid by the tailpipe. They're known as cornicles, and they just produce honeydew from the sugar that they can't break down. But typically, they'll be all over, pretty high up leaves, the top near the terminal. You can tell when you're walking through, and the tops of those leaves will be completely just covered in soot and sticky and syrupy looking. They lay a bunch of, or when they shed, they'll shed their skins, and that's another, you can kind of see on that petiole that there's skins everywhere. Now keep in mind, if you're checking and you've got a bunch of cotton aphids around middle of June to early July, there's a pretty good possibility that you're going to get the fungus that comes in and pretty much wipes them out. So if you're making a recommendation, keep in mind that that's always an option. So this is another, this is your biocontrol at work here. Those wasps will parasitize them, put an egg in them. We call those mummies. So if you see those in the field, that's all that is. Just keep in mind that's biological control working for you. Two-spotted spider mites. So these guys, and you can, I mean, just like it says, there's two spots on its back, both sides. That's the egg, which you won't be able to see. It's always good to carry a hand lens with you anyways, but you can carry your hand lens and look at these. It kind of looks like a little scalding underneath the leaf. You'll see webbing, and typically you'll see them crawling around, but again, they're very small. And on the top side of the leaves, it shows that red. It's kind of like looking at really, really old cotton. But once you see it, and you should, this bells and whistles should go off, and you see that two-spotted spider mites. Stink bugs in cotton. I'll let Steve probably go over this in the soybean section for identification on species, but typically all you need to know in cotton is that the big three, green, southern green, brown, they all get on cotton. They all feed on bolls. They'll probe around on those bolls until they find a seed, and that damage looks like that. We call that cat facing, and basically he's just gone around and probed until he found a seed to feed on. And if you take your pocket knife and you slice that bowl open, you pull that lock out, you can find what they call a wart. And that's, I mean, it's just telltale sign. And that lint will start to rot and turn all kinds of different colors. So here's a big one. Plant bugs, nymphs are always going to look like that, incomplete metamorphosis. They just, the only thing that changes is they grow in size and those wing pads get a little bigger. But if you can ID a small one, you can ID a big one. That's what they turn into, just the adult tarnished plant bug. It's also important to keep in mind, we don't see a whole lot of these, but you do see them in your sweep net, or you'll see them on the drop cloth. just keep in mind that if you do see a clouded plant bug, that's where we would count this as one plant bug. You'd count this clouded plant bug as 1.5 plant bugs. They do a little bit more damage. Now, damage on tarnished plant bugs, they will drop off. Like if they feed on this square, that square is going to drop off. It turns into just a missing square, so you just lost that fruit basically. If they feed on a bigger square, it'll flare the bracts, and more times than not, if you actually touch that square, it's probably going to fall off in your hand. So I mean, that fruit's gone just as well. Also, if they do feed on one that tends to stay on the plant, this is what we call a dirty square. It's just where they feed and just excrete, and it turns a dirty yellow color. We see this pretty often. If that square opens up, it turns into a dirty bloom. Same thing. So this is a quick little method that we use when we're scouting early cotton. So especially if you're surrounded by corn and you're getting corn silt dry down and tarnished plant bugs are moving around, they're leaving that corn, they're looking for something to eat. They're going to be moving around in that cotton field before they start laying eggs. You can run through these plants. You can check top 3 positions in each plant, and you do that until you count 100 first position squares, and you keep up with how many abscissed squares, damaged squares, or missing squares. And you do that for 100 plants, and you figure out what your square retention is. That's a pretty good method on, kind of seeing like, hey, we're not catching a whole bunch of bugs, but we are seeing a whole bunch of missing positions. So that might help you out, especially when there's just nothing but adults in the field. So anytime that retention drops, it's usually below 80%, 75, 80. You might want to start kind of thinking about going out with an application or something. The plant can compensate, but that's also highly variable on weather, and we know that we don't want weather making our decisions for us. So it's just important to keep in mind. Here's another big one, the bollworm. So if you're seeing this worm in a field of cotton and you're in BT cotton, more than likely it's the cotton bollworm. And if you're for some reason in a field of non-BT cotton and you see this, it can most definitely be tobacco budworm, but tobacco budworm is highly susceptible to BT cotton, and we don't really see them that much anymore. You'll see the moth in the field every now and again, pretty rare, but these don't feed on BT cotton. It just knocks them out. So again, if you're seeing this in the field, adult cotton bollworm, you see that's the larvae. This is the damage. They'll get in blooms, they'll get on squares, they'll get on bracts, they'll get on everything. They get in the bowls. So they'll feed they'll feed in the flowers, and then they'll move into squares as well. But this is our big problem. When they hit those bowls, they'll go in there and they'll completely eat out a bowl. And if they do leave anything, more than likely that bowl is going to rot anyways. So it's also important to keep in mind that you need to know what bollworm eggs look like, because some of our thresholds are actually based on egg lays now, especially in our 2-gene cottons. So eggs are white, cylindrical. They're kind of ribbed, really hard to see. But once you start seeing them, you kind of train yourself to see them. They do change colors from white to more yellow, and then almost kind of brownish, but right before they hatch. And what you're seeing is that head caps will start to sclerotize and change colors, basically. They lay eggs in terminals. Typically, you can go through real fast and look at terminals and kind of get what your egg lay percentage is looking like. But they also do lay on older foliage. This is some of my work from Mississippi State, and I infested, and they just lay everywhere. But where they really like to lay is in these bloom tags, and this is another thing that you can just kind of run through and pick a bunch of and look at. But what will happen sometimes is they'll lay on a flower that hasn't dried down yet, and when it dries down, it'll get stuck in one of these folds that dries up. If you make a application, you're not going to hit that egg. That egg's going to hatch. That worm's going to move down through that bloom tag into that developing bowl, and you never even know it's there. no spray application you're going to make is going to prevent that if that egg winds up in that bloom tag. There's another bloom tag comes off. There's a hole right there. Larvae's inside. So lastly, more times than not, if you're looking at something with Cry 1F, we don't typically see fall armyworm in cotton as much, but we do see them, oddly enough, in Bollguard 2, and it's pretty often. I'll say it's not rare, but a defining feature on these is the inverted Y on the head capsule and the 4 dots on the hind end, and they just kind of like bollworm. They'll feed on, you know, forming flowers, or they really like to feed on these bracts. They'll do etching. So if you see etching on a bract, more times than not, it's going to be a fall armyworm. And the adult, if you ever see it in the field, that's what that looks like. So that's what I have. Again, that's my phone number if y'all need that, an email, and my Twitter handle. So feel free to reach out to me and ask me any questions.